short. And I've gotten used to this. I like it as my shtick. Okay, so I'm Deborah. I'm my mom's eldest child. I'm the child that changed her life forever. All of you who have children, you know that. So today we're here celebrating my mother. And all lives have a beginning and an end. None of us are going to get out of this alive. And yet between these two time points that we have, a lot of things happen, a lot of living happens, a lot of craziness. And sometimes we're so busy with trying to live that we forget to live. We forget what's important and what's not important. And I think at times like this, it gives us a time to reflect, not just on what my mother's life meant, but what our lives mean and what is the impact we're having. I found a saying. I usually like sayings, quotes, or things, and it said, the most important days in our lives we're not even present for. And that seems like a strange sentence, but what it means is things that have a huge impact upon us happen so frequently at a time before maybe we were born or when we're early in our life, or things that we do or say have huge impacts that we will never see the impact upon, upon others and others, that rippling effect like when you throw a stone into a quiet lake. My mother's life reflects this. My mother was born in the middle of the Depression, so when I grew up, I always knew about the Depression. One of the things teaching nutrition is I started to realize that I was teaching individuals that had no one in their life that understood the Depression. No one who understood what it was like to look out at your children and know that you didn't have enough to eat, that somewhere the food would run out. My mother did not have really a mother, a biological mother, but my mother had been abandoned at about age 2. And this was done in a time when you just really didn't do those things. And it was done in a time when a lot of times if you didn't have that family, the man, the woman, the cat, the dog, the 2.3 children, and the white picket fence, that you weren't normal, that there was a lot of shame about this. And so my mother, she was kind of raised by a bunch of aunts, and her father was busy in his bakery. And in her childhood, men didn't really help raise children. And so my mother got to school, and miraculously, my mother kind of had learned to read somewhere along the way. And this first grade teacher saw something in my mother. She saw that my mother hungered to learn. She saw that my mother loved reading and that she had this whole other life that came through reading. And this teacher saw in my mother, not the shoes that she had one pair of shoes or the 2 dresses that were kind of tattered. This one teacher saw my mother as someone whole, someone powerful, someone who had something to give. And that teacher was so powerful in my mother's life that I know about her. So my mother, she loved school. She graduated 2 years ahead of her time, and she went to college. And initially she thought she was going to major in voice, which she did. And she, unlike her 2 children, she could sing and tune. And she went to University of Pacific and majored in voice. And something came up. She didn't know how to play the piano. Her family didn't have a piano. They didn't have that kind of money. She didn't really know how to read music as well as she should have to be able to major in voice. And so a door was closed. And my mother could have been bitter. My mother could have stopped everything there and just spent the rest of her life griping. But she didn't. She turned around and another door opened. And this was the door the universe knew that she had to go through. My mother, somehow, I wish I'd asked her, started to take a class in early childhood education, and she found herself. My mother became a teacher, and she wasn't just a teacher. My mother was a teacher. She loved teaching, and she started in Stockton, and she would have her class, and I get told, I don't remember, I was brought in a little bassinet. And so people say, when did you start school? And I said, I think I started school before I was born. I was in that classroom. And my mother just loved it. And somewhere, as I'm starting to turn 5 and Kirk's starting to turn 3, my mother takes a class on kind of a fluke on teaching kids to read. And my mother finds her little niche. And so she got a special credential, and she left the regular classroom for a while, and she taught special reading. And my mother was passionate about that, because as all of you who are teachers know, that you make or you break an individual if they can or cannot read. My mom knew that if a person couldn't read, you have doomed them to poverty. And it's not just poverty in the sense of not having money, not having food. It's poverty of mind, of soul, of ideas. When we look at people and we do measures of happiness, the best thing you can do, the most powerful thing you can do, is teach them to read. I think I started to realize the power of my mother's job when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it was September. Actually, no, it was August, and I was setting up her classroom with her. I would sharpen the pencils, and I would put things on the desk, and this woman came in, and I was standing next to my mother, and I think I, at that time, weighed just this tall, and the woman had tears in her eyes, and she was shaking, and she begged my mother, begged her. She said, "You need to have my child in your room." And I can still remember today, because I remember looking up at that woman, and she just said, "My boy has to be in your room. My child, I know he needs to know how to read, and I know you are the woman to get him to read." It was a powerful moment, because then I started to realize the power that my mother's job had. It certainly didn't come in the form of a paycheck. And I tell people that even though it didn't, I still got so much more from having a mother have a job that really impacted. So my mother, loved her kids, and there was times, when you're a child of a teacher that you get a little tired of being with the Pied Piper. Things that I didn't always like as a child, because I wanted mom to be mom, I really love as an adult. I still have an ex-boyfriend, high school boyfriend, who said, "Is your mom still driving shotgun with Clifford the dog in her car?" Something that used to embarrass me as a child, or I'd get picked up in high school and in the summer, and my mother would have a t-shirt that said, "I'm a radical reader," and mom just thought this was normal. But I went to, in about 2005, I went to the high school to speak. And I was asked to speak in a science class, and I was going to speak about genetics and about the Krebs cycle, which, I love, and it has meaning for me, and about your genotype and your phenotype. And my mom decided she'd come with me. She wanted to hear me speak. And so we entered into the high school, and I knew we had to sign up. We just couldn't show up on campus. And I'm kind of trying to figure out where we were going to sign so that we could be on that campus. And we went past the front where there was that big glass, and the front office is getting ready for the day, and there was this tall man waving to my mom, waving her on. And I looked at my mom and I said, "Do you know him?" And she said, "Yeah, he's one of my students." And she had that, that click in her heel, and she was just hot, and she knew these people. And she not only knew him as a principal, she knew him as a little person. I'm sure he was probably in her special reading classroom. And as we started to make our way to the classroom where I would speak, my mom went up and down the hallway, looking at the plaques, looking at the trophies, just getting a feel of where her students had been, because she remembered them, all of them. And who was doing what and where was doing. And then the bell rang and we got farther, and I was starting to get close to the classroom. And I started to realize that students were starting to get around us, and I realized I was not the rock star. It was my mom. And these students still remembered her. That's the power of teaching. I recently went onto Facebook. I was going to post something onto my mom's page, and I noticed that, how we can all describe ourselves, and my mom described herself as a retired school teacher, and I thought, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then a mother, and I thought, and I took that back because I thought, well, that, people do accountant, engineer, some people do like glitter fairy, they get really creative. But my mother, I knew, had made a really thoughtful decision of how she described herself. She described herself as a school teacher and as a mother. Those were her two important jobs. My mother, with very little mentoring, was a fabulous mother. And what motherhood did for my mother, and it took me until about age 27, 28 to realize this, is that motherhood allowed my mother to be both the mother she didn't have and the child she wasn't. My mother had a decision. She could have said, you know what, life wasn't easy for me and I'm not gonna make it easy for you. And that happens oh so much. Right now I'm dealing with people in my adult life, and you know they didn't get love, and they just, you know, they keep channeling out that negativity that was given to them. And my mother chose not to channel that, not to channel the negativity that had been given to her. My mother, because of my brother, became a grandmother. And what grandmotherhood did to my mother was that she became the grandmother she didn't have and the grandchild she never was. And my mother's life was so powerful to her children that she turned around a son that was very impactful in the lives of 5 children. So my mom didn't just impact 2 children, she impacted 7. That's the power of motherhood. Recently, something came up in my life. I have a person that I've known for about 8 years, and I met him in Southern California, and he said to me he knew my mother was ill, and then he knew my mom had passed away, and he said, I want to make a donation. And I said, and this man had been homeless. I'd met him homeless, and I'd helped him out, and I helped him with his dogs, and I helped him get into new housing, and I've helped him along the way. Anyways, he said to me, he goes, no, I said, well, you know, make a donation or something. Just the thought of it, my mother would appreciate. And I knew just the thought of it, my mother would appreciate. He goes, no, I want to make a donation. And so finally we went back and forth, and I knew I was going to lose this. So I gave him the Nevada County Pets and Needs information, and he made a donation. But this donation wasn't like me making a donation. This was every dollar in this man's pocket mattered. And when he told me what he donated, I said, oh no, that's too much. That's too much. It's good, it's okay. He goes, no, I want to do this. And I stopped for a minute and I thought about it. That man had never really met my mom. He knew about her through me. He knew about her through posts that she would put on my Facebook. But by making the donation, what he was doing is he was thanking my mom for me. Because he knew my mom. He knew my mom's love through my love. My mother's impact upon my life, before this man's life ever we had intercepted, had happened. The important day in his life had happened before he knew it. And I think about it. I think about that first grade teacher and how she impacted my mother, how my mother impacted me, and how I had impacted this one person's life. And then I was also reflecting upon, people lately have said, well, what did you get from your mother? What do you want? You're going through the house and things. And I thought about it, and I thought, okay. I liked that Madonna that she had in her window. I started coveting it, and I coveted it because it was just this simple thing that kind of represented different parts of my mom's life. I'd always seen it. And, but it's of really no monetary value. But it reminds me of my mom. And people say, well, don't you want other things? And I keep thinking, no, I won the lottery. She was my mom. I won the lottery. And then I reflect upon my own teaching. I taught for 14 years at the university. And I say I taught, I didn't profess, because I was a teacher. I learned from my mother what a student looks like when they're lazy and when they're fearful. And I didn't have to. In the university level, you don't need to get out of that classroom and go down to the patio area and go get a student and drag them back. But I knew from my mother that I had a student who was afraid to be in that classroom. And I talked to that one student. He had come from the high desert, a very poor area, an area actually that my brother was born into by irony. And what he said to me, he goes, well, the students are really young, they're very computer savvy, and I'm afraid to be in that classroom. And I said, yes, but if we don't do this, you're going to get an F. It's going to be on your report card. And so anyway, so I did some one-on-one tutoring, and we mainstreamed him into the room. Wasn't that my mother? I taught in the way that I had seen my mother teach. And it wasn't just that I was teaching them nutrition or community nutrition or research. I taught them love, because I knew from my mother the most important thing I could impress upon those students is to get them to realize that they were worthy, that they could do it, and they were going to do it. My students won the lottery because of my mother. They never knew my mother, but they knew her through me. And I don't think it's just irony that through Facebook, a lot of my students had connected with my mother. I'm a pediatric dietitian, and young, I always thought I would never teach. I didn't teach, in the elementary school, but I always thought I'm not going to have a life like my mom's. I'm going to have a job. I'm going to have a briefcase. I'm going to, be in a man's world. And what did I do? I became a dietitian in a woman's world. And I found my passion working with the underserved. I found my passion working with those with chronic illness. And I was fascinated with it, not realizing that part of my fascination was my father was ill my entire life. And what I was really interested in trying to work through was what had happened in my life. But one of the things I brought were those tangibles. I had little men, and I had dolls with G-tubes, and I brought my teaching that my mom had taught me. And more importantly, I brought my love. My patients won the lottery, not because just of me, but because of my mother and because of that first grade school teacher. My mother, that's the impact we can have on people's lives when we put out positive energy. Many times we touch someone, we don't know how we touch them, and then they go on and touch another. I was very thankful that a friend and my brother, a very good friend of my brother, made sure that I had realized that knowing that my mother was passing away these 2 years, that I had been given a gift, that I could spend the last 2 years and make sure that I saw her, make sure that I had conversations with her, make sure that I was present. Because for a while if I wasn't there, she wasn't passing away. And my brother and this one friend kept pushing me, getting me to lean into the pain and to be there with her, even though it was heartbreaking. I was there during my mother's last day on earth, and she talked about running, going out and running. And then we started, as she started kind of losing a sense of reality, she said, I want to get out, I want to run. We're going to run out of that hospital. And we said, you know what, Mom, we are. We're going to run out of this hospital. We're just waiting for the doctor, getting an order, then we're going to run out of the hospital. And I know that when my mother took that last breath, that she ran out of that hospital. And if there is anyone that the gates of heaven opened up, it was for my mother. My mother, when she got there, didn't have to do the good, the bad, the weighing. The angels recognized one of her own, because my mother had given and given so much. And she had channeled any positive energy that she had gotten onto others. On the 26th of December, I really believe that my mother got her wings. Thank you.